Hi there, and welcome back to another edition of teissTalk with me, your host, Jenny Radcliffe. Welcome to all of our lovely teissTalk audience who I can see already saying hello in the chat. Hello, everyone. We've got a great show for you today on teissTalk. We are going to be talking about playing it safe, the gamification of security awareness training, and I'm going to be joined by a great panel. We have got Betty L. Lucas, who is a regional CISO with Sodexo, and I'm joined as well by Melanie Oldham, who's the CEO and founder of Bob's Business. I am going to be looking for all of your questions. So in the chat, don't forget that the most engaged, funny, or most pertinent question that we get this evening is going to win the coveted teissTalk mug, which I am once again on location. I do not have with me. So I am looking out to give those away to all of you today. But before we go on to our panel discussion and our news item in a packed show, I am going to speak to today's front guest. Our opening guest is a friend of the show and very famous in this particular area. Welcome back, Lauren Zink. Can you switch on your camera? Hello, my friend. How are you, Lauren? Welcome back to teissTalk.
Yes, well, thank you very much. Thanks for having me back.
It's so lovely to see you. And Lauren always has this fabulous background with various things themed on the season, sometimes even on other things. So, Lauren, 6 months since we last spoke, or more, I think. Time flies. What's new with you? How are things?
Yeah, no, things are going great. I've taken a new position at a new company, and it's been amazing. They have a great culture, and I'm looking forward on building on that already existing culture to create a secure culture as well.
Yeah, so you're security and culture awareness manager at Indeed now.
At Indeed.com. Yep, that's right.
At Indeed.com now. So, I mean, what fresh challenges are you seeing? I mean, this is now, like I say, you're well known in the industry. We've got LinkedIn courses and a million other things. What sort of things is across your desk? What's keeping you busy?
I think there's a lot of new things that we maybe have touched on in the past, but we're seeing more of a focus on. For instance, people are going back to work now. So there's different risks. The last 2 years, have been training people on how to be secure in a remote workforce. And while that's still applicable, we need to think about some people maybe have never been in that office because they were hired during the pandemic.
Right.
Fully. So we need to make sure that we're creating training and awareness around that. I think some of the other things that we're seeing in the US, it's tax season. So that's a huge risk for people. People are going on spring break in the US, so they're traveling. There's a lot of risks associated with that. So that's an easy awareness initiative to push out at this time, very timely. And another one that we're seeing a lot of is QR codes. If you get on LinkedIn, you're seeing people promote the risks associated with that. And while they definitely have had their moment during the pandemic, if you go to any restaurant or anything like that, instead of having, the menu in hand, they're actually in the QR code. People need to be very wary of what they're scanning. And that's something that we need to, I think, create more awareness on. We've done phishing, vishing, smishing. Now I think they've termed it kishing with a Q. I don't know. I've seen that one, so I'm not sure if that's what we're going with yet or not. But I think that's something that we're definitely going to focus on is the risks associated with don't just scan that and think that you're going to a safe site. There are risks associated with that.
That's so interesting to me because I saw some frankly hysterical articles about QR codes during the pandemic. And really, it's just the same common sense advice, isn't it? You verify before you do it. Don't just zap anything. Yes. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? Strangers put QR codes everywhere, right? I mean, it's the same advice.
Absolutely.
Just different ways of getting to us. I was interested in what you said then about people coming into the office. I found from a social engineering point of view that that's been a big vulnerability, that people just haven't met each other yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they don't know, do you belong in this office? And this is, if your physical security team is not part of your logical security team, make sure that you're teaming up so that you're creating kind of a cohesive message on how to be secure and safe within that work environment back at the office. Because there's a lot of things that have changed, and maybe what we were preaching before the pandemic is different now. And there's additional risks. And like you said, you may not know that person that you're thinking works there and you're letting in the door. So you need to make sure that you're doing different awareness initiatives on not allowing people to tailgate, not holding the door open, making sure that people have their badges if that is applicable in your workforce. There's a lot that kind of goes into that people just haven't had to do in the last 2 years.
They haven't had to do it. And so people don't know which way is up. And also what I've found, and I just got back from the States, is that everyone's so happy that we're out and about and doing live events and in offices. I think people's guard's really down at the moment.
Yes.
So much vulnerability, just psychologically, but all sort of on, we're happy to be back in work.
Yes.
Weirdly.
Yeah, they're ready to be back in the office, and they want that interaction with people. I don't know if they even care who you are. They just want to talk to someone in person. So yeah, we just need to make sure that we aren't playing into that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is difficult. It is. Let's talk a little bit. It seems I've got you. You know, I always like to chat. We chew the fat about what's in the news and everything. One of the things we're seeing a lot of, certainly over here in the UK, and I wonder what it's like in the States, there's a lot of scams that kind of tie into recent events in the news. So we see stuff now that's playing on people's, I mean, they're so cruel, some of these fishes, but playing on people's charitable nature. The fact it's the war in the Ukraine and to donate. Are you seeing that across maybe your organization, but maybe more widely as well?
Yeah, I think that's a good awareness initiative to kind of play into people, not only at work, but also in their personal lives. They're seeing these scams that are happening in their emails, or, you know, they're getting text messages about it, or they're seeing it on social media. So it's important that they know who they're donating to, that they're going to legitimate, you know, organizations if they do want to donate. They're not clicking on links, not going on those QR codes. We want people to help. It's a great mission and great cause, but you need to make sure that you're secure in the way that you are doing so.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think it's always worth, you know, from an awareness point of view, and you're the expert here, but it's worth repeating it over and over again. I mean, I had a lady say to me a couple of weeks ago, she said, yeah, I've not heard of that scam. And I said, well, you know, you won't hear of every scam. You just need to think about the principles behind them, which is the same with the cushion as well, isn't it? It's just the principles behind it more than the form it takes or the method of delivery.
Yes, absolutely. I think, you know, one of the things is anything big that's happening in the news, people are going to try and exploit it. So make sure that if, you know, whether it's the Olympics or something going on in the Ukraine or during, you know, COVID, there were different scams that were associated with that. So staying up to date with that and just being, you know, wary and cautious and always asking questions and not clicking on those links or replying to any of those emails.
Well, we've got just a couple of questions in for you, and I knew there would be seen as the issue here. So we've got one of our teissTalk regular audience members, Lee, has said, he's had someone complain because he sent out some phishing training based on Ukraine scam emails. He had to forward them an article to say, look, this is a real thing. I mean, people find it distasteful sometimes, but it's an important part of the job, I think.
Yes, I think that you have to have a healthy balance. And the thing about those is that those are real risks, but you don't want to upset your employees. And while real scammers will play into those vulnerabilities, it's a fine line. So you need to make sure if you think that it's going to upset people, maybe instead of doing a phishing simulation on that, instead do an article, do an awareness, do, you know, an open ask me anything with a security team about that topic, as opposed to trying to use it and say, yes, you may see this as a real phishing scam, and we may do it in the future as a phishing simulation, but we've done different awareness around this, so you should be aware of it.
Yeah, I mean, we've got another one of the members saying that they had the same problem with the COVID vaccine. They had to show that that was the lure the hackers were using, so they used them. But I think that's good advice there from Lauren. Maybe we do it a different way. But then again, we can't tell what people are going to be offended by. And sometimes it's an immediate training that's needed. We've got a couple of questions here from Stuart, who's been a guest on the show and is one of our regular audience members. Oh, this is brilliant, this one. And what's been your biggest challenge to bring awareness to the table at your new organization, Lauren?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge that I've seen would be, we've got the buy-in from the leadership. We've got the people on board. I think it's just figuring out the culture and what's going to work there, because it is a different culture from where I came from before. And every organization has a different culture of what's going to work and what's not going to work. So you may come in thinking, I've done this, this, and this in the past, but guess what? Throw it all away because it may not work there. So I think you really have to spend the first few months making sure that you understand who your employees are, who your audience is, what they kind of have a hunger for to learn, and then start tailoring your training and awareness program around what they need and what they're looking for.
Absolutely.
It's been a hurdle, but we're getting there.
And I think as well, we're going to pick up on this a little bit, Stuart. Thanks for a great question there. But we're going to pick up a little bit on this when we talk about our main topic of gamification today. So keep those comments and questions coming, folks, and we'll get them to Lauren and the rest of our panel a little bit later on. I'm going to just pick up the article, our news article with you first, Lauren, before we go to our other panelists. And it's an article today, which, it seems to be that we're hearing this all the time. But this is an article by Phil Muncaster. It was in Information Security Magazine. And it's about the fact that Impervia, I can never say that, Imperva did a kind of a questionnaire, a survey about insider risk strategy. And listen to this, folks. So listen to this with my audience. It found that insider threats still cause 59% of incidents that impact sensitive data, and over a quarter of incidents over the last 5 years are down to human error or compromised credentials. But 29%, so that's a third of respondents, said that they do not see insiders as a threat, and that users found a way to get around the three main ways that they decided was the way to stop insider threat, which was training, monitoring and encryption. So a third of respondents, that security professionals, Lauren, don't see insider threat as a risk.
I think right there is an issue. Yeah. I mean, if you aren't making it a priority and you're not understanding that it is a risk, which it has been proven time and time again that it is, then how can we fix it? If we don't want to address it and we don't want to put the money and the budget and the people towards it, how can we make a shift to fix that issue?
Absolutely. Well, look, brilliant to speak to Lauren. Lauren, stick with us for our news item and our main topic. Always delightful to have you at the front of the show and on the panel. So thank you very much, Lauren Zink, for now. Just looking at some of the comments before we invite Mel and, oh God, I want to get it right. Better, yeah? I always say it wrong. Just look at Johan. Johan, obviously a friend of the show, saying employees are interesting when they're upset. I think he's just winding us up there, Lauren. And we've got Daniela saying, not a huge fan of simulations. Need to be sensitive to the timing. I think sometimes it depends on the industry. So let's invite to the stage our other two guests. We have Vatea Lucas from Sodexo and Melanie Oldham of Bob's Business. Welcome to the show, folks. Hi, Vatea. Am I saying that name right? I'm saying Vatea. I'm sorry if I get it wrong. Welcome to the
hi,
show.
Everybody. No, you're right, Jenny. You're right. Don't worry.
So listen, let's talk a little bit, first of all, about this article. Perhaps we'll go to Melanie Oldham first. Mel, 29% didn't see insider threat as even a risk. What did you think about that stat?
I think the argument where they've got this lack of budget or lack of expertise is the bit that I found the most shocking, because it's not about expertise. The things that we're trying to teach people are the basic principles. So what level of expertise do you need to get in there? And it's about communication, how we deliver them. I wonder whether there's an element of, it comes down to the fact of that they don't see it as a threat because it's not malicious. And it's the way that they perceive that malicious insider, it's around that, but it's around the fact that these are easy fixes. It's about good communication. And of course, it definitely needs to be addressed. I think the point that Lauren made earlier when she was talking about the messaging that we need to get across, I think that the message and how it's delivered can really, really cause feelings of mistrust. So it's really, really important for that messaging to be right and not have those barriers that are going to sort of change people's perceptions of cybersecurity. But it seems like we've got a perception that's really wrong here with this this survey.
Yeah, I mean, Vatea, what did you think about this? I mean, 29% don't see insiders as a threat. Training, monitoring, encryption are the main solutions. They said users get around it.
Yeah, I think, again, as Melanie just said, perception is important here. We need to factor that in. Most of the time when I'm discussing with the C-suite, for example, I'm used to use an analogy which is around the car accidents, because everybody is aware that you can get a car accident, but you still observe those strange behaviors on the road, if that makes sense. And I feel like it is a bit like that. We're all aware of it, but until it happens to you, it is something that is very distant from you, if that makes sense. And so that's what I call really the car accident syndrome, if that makes sense. And I think that's what we can observe as well in the cybersecurity space, including when it comes to the insider threat. Yeah.
I mean, it's all about perception of risk, isn't it, Lauren? If they, like Melanie's just said, they don't perceive it as malicious. The risk that they see as malicious is, if anything, overblown, in my experience.
Yeah, and I think we kind of talked about this the last time we spoke, I think, there's such a large focus on processes and technology. And while that is incredibly important, there also needs to be just as much of a focus on that human element and that people element. And I think we're starting to see that shift where we can figure out how we can work with all three of those together. And there's just as much of a priority on the awareness element when it comes to, protecting insider threat.
Absolutely. Well, that's our news item for the day. And it kind of leads us into our gamification, I guess. And we're talking about people, process, technology and everything else. So before we get on to that, we are talking about playing it safe, using gamification and security awareness training. And we're welcoming Melanie Oldham, Fatea Lucas and Lauren Zink to teissTalk. And welcoming all of our lovely audience who join us every week as well. So welcome to all of you. Don't forget, we are waiting for those excellent comments, questions and remarks, and somebody will win a teissTalk mug. Hold on to, I'm not going to say onto what, hold on to your beverage and you might get a mug. I know you said something there that wasn't very teissTalk friendly. So before we go into this gamification bit, let's say a little bit more about our other two guests. Melanie, do you want to talk to us a little bit about who you are and what it is you do?
Yeah, so Melanie Oldham, CEO and founder of Bob's Business, which is a cyber ed tech company that looks at obviously elements of content gamification, structural gamification, and everything in between. So we've been helping organizations across all industry sizes trying to improve the culture of cybersecurity within the organization and the human element. And then aside of that, I'm an advisor to industry on how we create clusters and improve communication and work better across all sectors of cybersecurity. So not just the human side, the people and the processes as well, in order to help increase resilience.
Thanks, Mel. And Fatea, how about you? Regional
Hi, everybody.
At Sodexo, right?
Yes, correct. So my role at Sodexo, which is a global organization, private organization operating in facility management and food services sectors. My role is to lead the IT and cybersecurity function for the UK and I region, because Sodexo being a global organization, we have multiple CISOs actually across the globe. But yeah, my remit is really to look at everything around security, data security across the organization within my remit.
Okay, well, let's have a look at our topic today then. Let's go first, I think, let's go to Mel first and talk about gamification. So you mentioned there, you said structural gamification, content gamification, and everything in between. Maybe people aren't quite clear what they are. Do you want to sort of define that for us and tell us a little bit more of an overview about what your view on this topic is?
Yeah, so structural gamification comes from where you make game elements from the components placed around it in order to drive learning. So we're talking about leaderboards, we're talking about kind of making sure that you have points received, badges, certificates for watching videos and completing things. And the other side is content gamification, where you're trying to make it more like a game, more like an experience. So you might start a course with a challenge as opposed to just listing what the main objectives are. So they're the sort of the two components. And I guess from an implementation point of view, structured gamification is easy to implement, but we also know that competition has a massive effect around how we do things. So the benefits of gamification are about us kind of, I guess, to a degree, becoming more immersed in it, more engaged in it, and that has that peer-to-peer influencing. And we know that if we make something more enjoyable, more engaging, then actually there's probably, if content's delivered in a sort of very authoritative way, there's a 20% chance of engagement. If it's delivered with peer-to-peer influencing in a positive way, so the language that we use about trying to get people to complete courses is about 60%. So it has a really significant impact on trying to get people.
What was 60%? Where's that stuff from? Sorry.
60%, I will tell you, it's from the studies in terms of engagement. I think Talent have done some of this elements around gamification and engagement, but it's about how much more of the, how more responsive we are to it. And one of the biggest problems, I guess, with awareness training and education is actually getting people to do it in the first place. So although you might not be a fan of it, although you might not actually think this is for me and I don't want to do role play, I don't want to do all these sort of things that are going to make me feel a little bit uncomfortable, and I prefer things read in black and white, part of that barrier is getting people to do it in the first instance, which is why the whole communication piece and the whole culture piece really play a real important part as to why gamification can work for an organization. Because, typically learning can be quite dull, it can be quite boring. If you present a policy, not everybody's actually going to engage with it. So it's about getting people to engage it. There is that argument then as to, how effective is it?
Okay, we'll come back to you in a minute, Mel, because I know you've got a lot on this. Fatea, what about you? Do you agree with Mel? Have you used gamification in your awareness?
Well, I think we are only starting the journey to go on that route where we try to have much more interactions with our people, with our users, because yes, I'm convinced that when people are enjoying it, they are learning much more efficiently. They are willing to learn as well. They are more open to receive the information, I would say. Yeah, because if you just force anything, security or not, whether if you have a relationship with your people where you force them to go through a process that they don't want to do, you're not going to be successful that way. You need to engage with them.
Okay.
You need to get them on board. Yeah.
Okay, because I mean, I'm going to go to Lauren before I put in my 2 penneth, but I thought that they won awards for participation, so they are being forced, aren't they? I mean, Lauren, what's your view on this? I'm not convinced at all.
No,
I'm just not.
Yeah, no, I've seen it be successful. I think, something that needs to be kept in the back of your mind is just as with any other training, it needs to be tailored to the audience, and gamification may not work for everyone. So your C-suite or, your finance team may not want to engage in the gamification aspect. So you may say, okay, we're going to do this with developers, or we're going to do this with, HR. But you need to look at who is it going to work with. And that's part of understanding your culture and making sure that you're not doing that one size fits all for the training. And I think another aspect that we need to keep in mind is kind of how do we continue to keep them engaged? So if we've done this training, we've done kind of the gamified aspect of it. Now it's a year and a half later. Well, how do we continue? Do we need to refresh the training? Do we need to do something new? Or do we just continue to have this leaderboard? And I think eventually it starts to fall off. So we need to make sure that we're keeping them engaged year after year.
Yeah. I mean, I always say, I think that work is what you have to do and play is what you choose to do, isn't it? And I suppose if we're rewarding people for watching, some training or completing the training assessment quiz or something, they have to do it, don't they? So isn't that just the same as forcing them to watch something? Anyone can take that.
I can pick up this one. Yes, you're right. But again, it puts your mind in a certain way, I would say, that makes you much more open to the information. Otherwise, you just do it to tick the box and that's it. You're not going to learn anything, but that's more because you need to do it. It's just like a bit, when you have traffic lights, you choose in the end to respect it or not, if that makes sense. Again, if the law is here to tell you that you should respect it. Do
people always obey a traffic light if you don't have to? You just said yourself, people have, you give the driving analogy. If you don't put the traffic lights there, I don't think people necessarily obey the rules, do they? I mean, that's the thing with this for me. There's a lot of
Yeah, if I can. No, it's about the engagement piece though, and it's like Talent LMS did a really, really good gamification survey, I think in 2020, and it was sort of saying that people feel more productive, 80%, 89% more productive, and 88% more productive if it's made and delivered in a gamified way. And so they're statistics back from the survey they did, which just shows that it's the emotive way that it makes you feel when you're doing something more positive, and that's what drives you to do it and engage with it better. So it's not just about, is it the same information just delivered in a different way? Yes, it is. Are you still forced to do it? But it's about the emotions of it, partaking in it and being happier in yourself and more engaged, and knowing actually the culture has a more of a inclusive mentality to doing it rather than just an enforcement area.
Would you agree with that, Lauren? Because I think what if you don't like, I don't know if it is inclusive. That's one of my main worries about it, is what if people don't enjoy learning in that way? Then they're not going to make leaderboards or anything else. How is it inclusive?
Yeah.
If it only appeals to, what if it doesn't appeal to you? What if you have a diversity and you're in diversity? That means you don't like competitive. I think it's about the design of it, surely.
Yeah. And again, I think there's not a one size fits all. In addition to maybe different groups don't want to do gamified training. Maybe, people learn differently. There's different learning styles. And anytime I go into something, once my program is mature enough, I like to start looking at how can we start tailoring the program to different learning styles as well. So then you have options when it comes to your training and awareness. So again, maybe you're not just pushing the gamified option to everyone, but you're saying, here's your option. If you prefer this, you can take this. If not, you can take this.
Yeah, and there's an argument to be said that you have to have had something 12 times before it actually becomes habit or behavior. So actually having multiple delivery methods, then people can latch onto the ones that suit them best. But there's also the element with gamified learning, which is it reduces the risk, especially when we're talking about content gamification because it reduces the risk. If you're testing and getting somebody to complete sort of a phishing game or a smishing game, those sort of things, and complete them online, it's actually in a safe environment. It's not going to cause damage, but they're going through the same experience as though they were doing it in real life and knowing how to report it, but taking that risk away from the organization.
Okay, let's have a look at some of the questions that are coming in from our teissTalk audience. We've got, this one's from Simon, does gamification risk coming across as another form of patronising? How do you teach awareness and make people feel clever rather than stupid? Let's go to Vatea. What about that one?
I think, again, you need to be positive in the approach. Yeah. Otherwise, not to highlight where you're wrong, but highlights where you're right, and then convey the message the right way to say, there are some areas of improvement that you need to work on, and we're here to help. But I think, again, back to what has been said before, identifying the populations you have is key in my view, because typically, if I use Sodexo as an example, we can't disseminate one training to everybody. It will never work. No. People who are operating in restaurants, it doesn't make sense to send them the same training as the people in the finance department typically. Yeah. So I think that's also really important to make sure it is relevant to them, to what they do on a day-to-day job as well.
Yeah, because it massively backfired at Disney, didn't it? I don't know if you know this Disney example. There's an example at Disney where they had a traffic light system, which was sort of gamifying tasks. And it's just that you use the restaurant example, but their maintenance, cleaning and beverage staff were unduly penalised because of the way their shifts worked and because of physical disabilities. They could never make it up the board. Whereas obviously office workers and desk workers made it easily up the board because they had, I suppose, they're in front of the computer more. I don't know the reason behind it. But that Disney study did show exactly what you said, Vitae, that it's got to be different for different people in the organisation. One size just really doesn't fit all at all.
And I would add on top of that, you also need to communicate with the other departments. It should not be driven by IT security, in my view. That's a business risk. So that's a business project, if that makes sense. And we need to collaborate across the organization with communications, with legal, with HR, to find the right approach to make it happen and to make it work to your different populations within your organization. If it comes from IT, it won't be necessarily well received, I think.
It's that whole communication piece. So when we engage with an organization, it's about having all those individual operational units involved. So having HR so that actually they understand what does it feel like if you're a victim of phishing, and they're actually there as a caring and sharing. So it's not this name and shame and being identified. It's actually, if this comes to you and it has an impact on you, how can we help you and support you? And I think it's important that they are aware, for example, when you're talking anti-phishing campaigns, that each of the departments are aware of it before it happens, so they can turn around and say, if anybody feels that they need any support on this or has any questions or wants to know why, it's really, really important that all teams are able to answer that, and that you use your marketing teams, for example, to put the messaging out there in that really positive way, because we know that positive reinforcement really does increase engagement. And then when something's sort of reported, rather than sort of doing that naming and shaming of 25% of you clicked on the link, it's using social proofing and turning around and say 65% of you didn't click on the link. That's brilliant. How can we get the rest of you on board? And doing it in that positive way. But the language is really, really key. In the same respect, you don't want to make anything too complex in the way that you deliver something, too technical and too IT and speak. You don't want to dumb it down too much either. So knowing your audience and having champions within the organization in the different operational units that can actually speak to those people will really strengthen those campaigns as well.
Lauren, good points, but true of all awareness, I would imagine.
Yeah, no, I think, we need to make sure that we're looking at that training, and like she said, we're communicating it, we're making sure that it's put in a positive light, but we need to ensure that it's also non-punitive as well. And I think that that's where, when you look at leaderboards and you start communicating that up to leadership, they're going to start saying, okay, well, why is my HR department down here and finance is up here when it comes to the training? And you need to figure out how you're going to handle that so that it doesn't become punitive. Even if you said it wasn't going to be non-punitive, people are going to start saying, what are we going to do? They're going to start drilling their organization. And you need to make sure that you kind of control the narrative of that and let them know, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to offer additional training, additional awareness, and we're going to make it positive versus negative.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, There's a lot of evidence to suggest that from a psychological point of view, if you say, if you do this, then you get that. People are more interested in the that than the this. And so what I have seen in any, and it's not just gamification, but in any training where there's a reward is a punitive measure, because what it is the exercise of power over someone. You either get the reward or you don't. Right? Just because we don't call it punishment, it's still an exercise in power. And so what people end up doing is, don't they, and I'm interested in Mel's point of view this, because obviously you'll have had a lot of data on this. I've seen instances where they learn to game the system, so they get to the top of the boards, they complete the training. They don't necessarily absorb the training.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, and that's talking when you're talking about structured gamification, and it's really important to have that balance of how do you test whether or not that's actually working and implementing. It's about having that balance, because you can give people all the information under the sun, but it doesn't mean that they absorb it, which is why having that balance between structural and content is really, really important.
So how do you test it then?
By having those immersive experiences, by actually putting people in those environments and testing it that way, so replicating, so being able to identify the phishing emails. Again, that is that experiential learning, even going down to escape rooms, obviously, which is being more and more explored now, is how would you react in that situation? What would be your response? Sorry, Siri's speaking to me. Here's what it's found. But it's, it's the communication piece is really the key, and being able to test that. But it's that balance, the reinforcement piece, that information knowledge of disseminating that information is important, because it gives the context.
Yeah. Let's go to another question. Do you think incentivizing helps from a company culture standpoint? Let's get this to Lauren. We're talking culture. What would those incentives be?
Yeah, I think, again, there's a fine balance in line when it comes to incentivizing, because you don't want to be incentivizing all the time. So then the only time that they're going to do it is if they are incentivized to do it. I think that you need to look at what's the best way to incentivize. And I think sometimes ways that I found it is just incentivizing for engagement, and not incentivizing every individual. More so, you're going to get entered into this, and then you may have the chance of winning. And I think, if we are incentivizing every individual for every little thing that they do, they're going to expect that going forward. So, like I said, fine balance. I like incentivizing, but your take on that, Jenny, was something that I've never heard before, and it's very interesting. And I'm going to start doing a little more research on how it becomes punitive. Yeah, I never thought of it.
Because you can give it and take, and also it makes the whole thing a little bit more manipulative. So people are interested in the reward as opposed to what they have to do to get there. What worries me is the lack of absorption of that. Now, I think Mel makes good points on communication, but that's not gamification. That could be from anything, and that's what worries me. If we're interested in this, there's an interesting study. It's an older one, but it's been quoted a lot later. And sorry, our teissTalk elf, I didn't warn you in advance, but Boggiano and Main did an interesting paper called The Bonus Effect, all about how incentives, performance incentives actually are not necessarily something that motivates people at all. They increase the desire for the reward object and take away focus on the task itself. Interestingly, temporary obedience is what they're talking about. So that's interesting on incentives. Let's have a look if we've got anything else here. Agree with human factors and doing research and gamification for security awareness training. I mean, I'm not saying that gamification is a bad thing. I like some of the gamification side of it, but that's my preference. And I'm a capable, able person in front of a computer a lot of the time. I'm just wondering whether it always works. How do you anticipate being able to change human behavior? Gamification helps with engagement and understanding, but will it change behavior?
My viewpoint is it's challenge your thinking, especially when you have content gamification. It's challenging the way that you're going to behave and you're going to respond, getting you to think about it rather than necessarily hitting a hotspot, rather than necessarily a leaderboard. If you've actually got to think about what is the action you've got to take, then it's that immersive side of it, and that's what influences your behaviors.
I mean, we've got a question in from Danny. Thank you, Mel. We've got a question in from Danny. How do you stop gamification trivializing the challenge? Or have I missed that bit? It does say, all the research says, we've got Punished by Rewards, a book by Alfie Cohn here in Norgren, et al., Paying for Performance. They've all said sorry to say it, but they've all said that it creates a false set of incentives and trivializes the overall message.
It's thinking about why you're implementing it, because if you're implementing it to get more people engaged, which is the first hurdle, it's then how do you retain them and how do you influence them? So I wouldn't look at it as a solution to fixing the problem or to addressing it. It's that initial engagement. And the reality is that typically online learning has 10 to 15% engagement, which is really, really low. So the gamification element is not about the absorption, it's about getting people over that first hurdle, and then what are you going to do with them past that point? That's how we perceive it.
So you're saying that the gamification element is to get them to watch the content.
Yeah, when we're talking about leaderboards, when we're talking about social proofing, when we're talking about rewards and those sort of things, what's going to attract people to look at it in the first instance? Because by their natural default, they've got a million and one of the things playing on their time, playing on their attention. What's going to capture it for that moment? It's not necessarily going to retain it. It's not going to make an influence, but you need to get it in front of them in the first instance. It's then your role then to look at content gamification as to how do you then make it an interactive experience, how do you test what they're learning, how do you take that to the next step. But it's about getting bums on seats and getting numbers, and that's what competition does. That's what those elements of structured gamification really do. They get the people in the door.
And then if the content's not boring in the first place, then they'd still stick around, right?
But the option is is policies. Policies do not engage; they don't do it. So how do you get people on? And then if the content's engaging and they're learning, and you're putting into your comms what they're getting out of it, and you're able to put that with some some content gamification where you're really testing what's the right action you should be taking within that safe environment, or immersing them in an environment, a bit of role play. Where do you take it to the next level? It's seeing that that's sort of an entry point to gamification as opposed to the be all and end all.
Yeah, I suppose, but if it's the policy that you do the training, to me it goes around a circle. If I have to do it, it's not a game. Maybe the problem is the term.
I think so. Yeah.
The fact that if it's a game, we choose to do it when we don't have to do it. If there's no choice, then to me it's not a game. What do you think, Fateh? What do you think?
Well, I think again that's about how we engage. So understand where you're coming from when you say if in the end you're forced to go through it, that might not be perceived as a game. But again, perhaps the term game or gamification is not the right one. What is important is really about the experience for the user, for the employee. Let's put at this, to the extremes. And sorry, by the way, I got some sensors who just put the lights
okay,
off.
We can hear.
Perfect. Let's put that to the extreme. If we say you need to learn a policy by heart because that is going to help you reacting to cyber risks, versus we will take you through a journey where you will have to interact with a machine, or you will have to, to play a game, if that makes sense. I hope and I suspect many people will go for the second option, because reading 30 pages long documents is, in my view, probably not going to get lots of success for many people.
Sure.
With few exceptions, perhaps. But I try to put the both extremes, obviously here. But I think again.
Well, I think Dawn's saying the same thing. Fateh, it's what we're saying all along: is that gamification needs to be diverse enough to meet all needs and personalities. And I always think we compare it to like some crazy fun Space Invaders type of training next to some boring, like massive yellow pages document. And of course, it needn't be either or. It needs to be a lot of the different ones.
The other element is we're social animals. And I think the whole point about gamification and competition means that we start doing something together. And therefore, there is, it kicks in that peer-to-peer influencing again of we want to do what other people are doing. And it opens up communication. And it means that we're on the same point. Otherwise, we're just all solo learning, doing something on our own that doesn't have that same level of positive enforcement and engagement.
I don't think you can assume that, Mel. I don't think you can assume that. Surely by the very nature of competition, you're encouraging competitive behaviour, which I don't know, in most organisations are looking for a more emotionally intelligent workforce. I'm not sure it's always a good thing. I'm sorry, I just can't say that. Lauren, is competition
Yeah, I think it's a multi-layered approach. I think what we're seeing now is gamification is kind of a buzzword. It's what everyone's selling right now, and it's not the end all be all to fixing your security awareness culture. I think the best approach, in my opinion, would be having it as an aspect, like one portion of your security awareness program, and making it an option. So if you want to do something like an escape room, do it during Cybersecurity Awareness Month and make it optional, and see what kind of feedback you get, see if you can align some metrics with that, and if it's successful, align the groups that found it to be beneficial, and then start gamifying from there. But I don't think just putting gamification in everything is going to be the answer to changing your culture. And like I said before, people learn different. People may find that they feel like they're being treated a little bit like a child. I've actually seen gamified security awareness simulations that looked very similar to what my first grader takes at her school.
Yeah.
When I'm putting her in different coding camps and things like that. And I said, I just could not imagine putting this in front of my CFO and saying, can you do this training? And I think they would come to me and think I didn't know what was going on.
But as we've said with Mel just a few minutes ago, I think some of it's the problem is the term, Mel. I think you've got a lot of people, a lot of firms coming in, labeling their product, they're offering as gamification. But in actual fact, is it really? It's just it's what you do with it, as you've said along, isn't it?
And that's quite dangerous, because it might fall flat. And the last thing you want to do is put something you think is going to be gamified and you're expecting something that's going to be wow. And actually we're talking a leaderboard and a certificate. A certificate does not get me overly excited. But you know what I mean? I think it is that terminology and those names, and it is such a wide coverage.
Yeah, I think so as well. Let's just get some more answers before I come to you all for some final words on it. We've got Neil saying, is fun training more important than gamification? I think that's really what we're saying, isn't it? It's not the label gamification, perhaps. I think that's what's problematic. I think people call it gamification when it isn't. Fateh, what do you think on that one? Fun training more important than gamification?
Totally. I'm full agreement here. And again, perhaps that's where we play on terms. But for me, forget about the leaderboards and all of that. I think that's about, again, the experience you disseminate. That's the vehicle that you're going to use for your users to get the knowledge, to raise their awareness. But again, that's just one, that's what the user sees. That's just one piece of your training program. You still need to have sponsorship coming from the top, to have, to make sure that it becomes important to your people. So typically, I don't know, why not talking to your senior execs who clicked on the link once and got victim of phishing, and used them perhaps as a way to disseminate, positivity around that, say, it happened even to me. I'm the CFO, I'm trained, I know what is the cyber risk, but I still fail for the trick. Admit it, and then we can build a communication around that and make it positive, so that at least people, for example, they do not perceive that as being a punishment, as somebody said before.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got just saying, there's a lot more questions. I think we're going to come. Mel, do you want to give us some final words? We're moving up towards the end. Obviously, this is a controversial one. It's one that's going to run. But what are your final thoughts on this, Mel? I mean, it's a crowded market, this gamification labels creating, isn't it? Not everything's equal. Not all products are equal, right?
They're not, but it's a crowded market because, like you said, everybody learns very, very differently, and they're all different styles and they're all different flavors. I know from creating Bob's Business, people thought, "Oh, what on earth are you doing, presenting an egg person to people?" But I know, there's organizations that it works and it stands out, and it's about finding that organization, what makes them kick, and what are they engaged with. And I think it's about anything that can challenge people in a really positive way. Then that's gamification does that. So some people like it in different ways. Having that mix. And bearing in mind, the reinforcement takes about 12 points. So sticking with one solution and expect it to work across everybody, you're being naive. But also going back to the original article, which is that people don't see insider threat as a threat. Obviously they are, but also that you don't have the expertise in-house or the money to pay for it. A lot of these solutions are really, really cheap, easy to implement from a structural point of view to be able to get the results that you need to get the bums on the seat. So start somewhere and think about, the term gamification. I wouldn't have said, structured gamification when we're talking certificates and rewards and leaderboards is gamification. To me, I want something I can get my teeth into that engages me, makes my eyes light up, that sort of thing. So it's just how you use the terminology, but doing something is better than doing nothing and letting insider risk just continue to grow.
Okay, and it's just like one final comment, then I'll go to Lauren to close us down. But we've got Stuart's final comment says, the whole reason we're doing this is to make a security culture. Surely it's a balance. Gamification may not be the holy panacea, should be mixed with other methods. And we've got Neil saying champions play an important role. Dawn agreeing with Stuart. And as I said as well, echoed by Stuart, competition creates conflict. It does. Some of us love it and don't mind it at all. There's others that don't. I mean, Lauren, do you want to just sum up your final thoughts on this one? It's not going away anytime soon, I wouldn't imagine.
I think I kind of already said it. I think gamification is the buzzword in the awareness arena right now. And I think that there's a lot of people that are pushing it. I do think that it has a place in security awareness programs, but I don't think that it's the end all be all. And I think that truly understanding the culture of your organization and your people will lend a better ability to be able to utilize the gamification in a positive way. Knowing who wants to compete, knowing what groups are interested in that, and then tailoring your training to that as well as their learning styles will help you to be successful and, you know, really create that true cultural shift when it comes to security awareness.
Thank you, Lauren. Well, I just want to say I've got a lovely comment here from Dawn in the chat, which says, if we increase awareness and reduce incidents due to human error by even a little bit, it's better than we've got now, which I think is the best comment of the day. And therefore, Dawn, you get today's teissTalk mug. I want to say thank you to Lauren Zink, Melanie Oldham, and to Vitea Lucas for being brilliant guests. Thanks to the teissTalk audience. And don't forget to join Jeff White for the Thursday show at 4:00 UK, where the next episode is all about investigating that malicious insider threat that we touched on the article. Thanks again to the teissTalk Elf and to all my panelists, and we'll see you again on the next episode of teissTalk. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.